All right. Well, I guess that we're just going to go ahead and get started here. So, welcome everyone, and thank you for spending a part of your day with us. We are so excited to be chatting with you all today. I'm going to start off by just letting us all be a little bit honest for a second. Every B2B marketer and seller has that moment. You look at the forecast, the pipeline, the conversion rates, and you feel your stomach drop. Because once again, what was supposed to be predictable turns out to be a total guessing game, right? Does that sound familiar to anyone? I'm sure it does for Matt and Maura here, and it certainly does for me. Well, today we're going to talk about fixing that. Not just patching things up, but building something better. A pipeline that you can actually rely on, one that doesn't vanish at quarter's end or fall apart because of, messy handoffs or misaligned targets. We're going to talk about consistency, confidence, and growth that you can actually scale. Hi everyone. My name is Josh Baez. I'm the senior manager of demand gen at NetLine, where we are leading the way in programmatic lead generation. So at NetLine, our goal is to connect audiences like you with content just like this, and we hope that you love it. With over 15,000 publisher partners and the largest content syndication network on the web, we help our clients generate not just more leads, but more of the right leads. Because your buyers are out there, and so you should be too. I am so lucky to be your moderator for this conversation today. And joining me are two people who have lived this, breathed this, solved this to some degree. And they've helped countless others do the same. So, first off, we have Mr. Matt Heinz, founder and president of Heinz Marketing. I'm sure you all know Matt. If you've ever Googled a B2B sales or marketing challenge, I'm sure Matt's name has probably come up in some way, shape, or form. So, Matt, thank you so much for being here today.
Josh, thanks for the invite. I'm excited. I love this format, right? Like, if we got a topic and we can do a bunch of slides, great. But like, and ask me anything to especially to be able to do it with Maura, I love and respect for all the work that she does. This will be a lot of fun. We'll keep it interactive. We're not going to take ourselves too seriously. So excited for this session.
I love it. Yeah, and Maura, thank you so much for being here too. So Maura Rivera, CMO of Qualified. Maura, you are at the forefront of how sales and marketing teams are building smarter, more connected pipeline engines. I'm so excited for you to be here today.
Thanks for having me, Josh. I know I always feel like I'm in the midst of a celebrity when I'm alongside Matt Heinz. But super excited to be here. And I also am excited about the format where we can just chat and answer questions and be open about all things pipe gen.
Yeah, I love it. So, a little bit of context for our attendees today. We're going to do a little like back and forth with me asking some questions to Matt and Maura, and then at the end we'll have time to answer your questions that you've asked. So, our lovely person Brenna is in on the back end. She is saving all of your questions for us that we will review once we're all wrapped up here. So, with that being said, Matt and Maura, before we dig in. I want to have each of you quickly just like introduce yourselves and what you do at Heinz Marketing and at Qualify, just in case there's people who don't know, and also share why this topic of predictable pipeline is so critical for marketers and sellers in 2025. So Matt, why don't you go first?
Yeah, appreciate it. So, predictable pipeline is sort of near and dear to what we do. And especially for a lot of you that are in B2B, a lot of you that are in complex sales situations, the longer, more complex your sales process, the more people on the buying and selling side get involved. Like we talk a lot about buying committees and buying stages and all the different like points of contact you need to have to keep a deal on rails to increase confidence and consensus amongst that buying committee towards a commitment to change. Like that doesn't happen. So you have to sort of orchestrate that. And orchestrating that happens across a complex set of people on the seller side as well, right? It's the integrated motions and campaigns we do for marketing. It's the integration with our sales and customer success counterparts. That's a lot of moving parts. And if you're just doing random acts of all of that, your pipeline is going to be very lumpy. And so, we're still in a market where like deals are taking longer. Customers don't have like an open checkbook. And so for you to proactively manage that process, for to proactively manage that consensus building amongst a buying committee, you have to have strategy process playbooks to make that happen. And so like, we're a big proponent of making sure that people get those things in place and run those consistently, effectively internally to create more predictability, more repeatability, and scalability of that pipeline moving forward.
I love it. Maura, what about for you? Why is this topic so top of mind?
Yeah, I mean, Qualified's been around for about 6 years, and we are obsessed with pipe gen. We sell to marketers, and we're really focused on helping kind of transform the sales to marketing handoff in the pipe gen process.
Mhm.
We have an AI SDR agent. Her name's Piper, and she's focused on helping marketers follow up with every lead autonomously and at scale. And it's a really exciting time, I think, for marketers because the pipe gen playbooks that we've all been following for the past 10, 15, 20 years, it's all changing in front of us. But one thing that's not changing is you have to have like a foundation and a solid foundation for your pipe gen model. And I think as marketers, one thing, it's actually my CRO says it a lot. He says it's not just pipe gen, it's pipe when. How do you make sure that you're thinking about when your pipeline's going to hit, who's going to cover it, how long those deals will take, and be able to look out over the next year, the next 18 months, and make sure you have proper coverage for your sales team. So pipe gen is something that I'm passionate about as a CMO. It's because it's what our product helps with, but it's also, I think, a really exciting topic because everything's changing with how we kind of approach pipe gen with all this new AI technology. So it's an exciting time.
Yeah.
As much as I am a happy qualified customer and have been for a while and have known about Piper for a while, the penny just dropped for me. I literally did not say like pipeline. Piper is a name.
I was on LinkedIn and someone mentioned that. I was like I was like on a Qualified's LinkedIn and I saw that too.
Nothing's on accident. Piper.
Like, well, in my defense, I know a Piper, so I immediately thought about her, and so like, but
That's who
Piper's
it's named
such a
after.
brilliant name for this. Anyway.
Yes. I'm glad we connected those dots. Yeah.
There you go. That's resonance right in real time.
Yeah.
That's great. Amazing. So this is great. I'm so excited for you two to be here to talk about this because I think that this is going to be a really nice discussion, especially as people, we're wrapping up Q1, we're heading into Q2, and a lot of people I know are probably planning for like second half of the year also. So let's get into it. We're here because pipeline unpredictability doesn't just stall deals, like it shakes buyer trust, right? It slows down teams, caps your growth. But if you get it right, then like so many things are opened up to you. So my next question for you both is, what do you believe is the single biggest pipeline killer that you run into over and over again? Maura, I would love to have you start that off.
Yeah, I mean, it's speed. It's speed to lead. I think that is the ultimate pipeline killer, and it hurts businesses, and ultimately it's a bad experience for buyers. We talk about this stat all the time, but 78% of buyers, they go with a vendor who responds to them first. And if you go and do a secret shopper exercise and see how long it takes some really, really great companies to get back to you when you fit their ICP and fill out a form, it can take hours, it can take days, it can take weeks. It's nuts. And I feel like in 2025, that won't cut it anymore. And as a marketer, I think we've all felt that pain of like, I'm doing all this stuff to bring you pipeline. I'm running campaigns. I have events. I'm handing over the leads. And when they don't get worked in a proper fashion, that breaks my heart and it hurts the bottom line. So speed is the ultimate killer for me.
Yeah. Matt, what about you? What's your killer?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I thought about was time, right? Which is a function of that as well, right? I think like what a couple years ago might have seemed like sort of a nice, competitive differentiator. Speed is table stakes, right? And if you're not following up, to Maura's point, like, you're going to lose the deal. It's amazing how much that is important. I would add to that though, multi-threading, right? I think your ability to sort of integrate whatever engagement you have with the context of the relationship you have with that company, with the account is really, really important. So, and I think it's not only important to make sure you're addressing that lead quickly in the context of what you know in the relationship you have, but also bringing those other people into the conversation. Right? Like it's crazy to me how many companies with large deals are still single threaded. You got one person that responded, one person shows up for the meeting, and you're not spending time thinking about who else has a vested interest in this problem, who else cares about this outcome. You may have different approaches and different reasons to care about it. But unless you get to that commitment to change with a consensus of people, your deal's on thin ice. The easiest way to get a higher conversion rate and more predictability is to get that commitment to change from that multi-threaded group of people. Yeah. And it's not just speed to lead, Maura's right, but time kills deals, right? So make sure that when you have follow-up, that's happening quickly. Make sure you're scheduling next meetings. Make sure as you're multi-threading, you may have different cadences and frequencies and conversations with multiple people. Yes, that gets complex to manage, but if you've got the right playbooks and process in place, you can execute that across a go-to-market team consistently and effectively.
Yeah, I love that. So at NetLine, we just released our 9th annual State of Content Consumption and Demand report, and we found that the average amount of time it takes when a buyer first registers for content when they actually open it is somewhere like 38 hours now. So like we call that the consumption gap. And so it's taking like nearly 2 full days for buyers to actually engage with content. But that doesn't mean that you can just set and forget about them and wait those full 2 days. Because in those 2 days, like they're doing a ton of research, right? So when it comes to like the nurturing of that engagement after the registration or after like that first touch, like what do you two typically think about or recommend to your teams when it comes to how you ensure that it's not just speed to lead, but also like the speed to address the need that buyer is obviously like demonstrating. Matt, I was wondering, like, Matt, do you want to take that
Yeah,
first?
yeah. Well, so like, here's a great example. Like Greg just downloaded the report, right? So that's awesome. Greg got the report. So like Josh now has your email address, right? And so
Aha.
like if someone on Josh's team called you this afternoon and said, "Thanks for downloading the report. Would you like to see a demo in NetLine?" Your answer is probably going to be no, right? Because you're
We
like, I
won't do
just
that,
wanted
Greg,
the
I promise.
report. I'm interested in this. This is interesting. So speed to lead is important, but the context in which you respond is also critically important.
Yep.
Don't say, "Would you like to say a demo?" It's like, why the hell did you give Josh your email address? Like, what was important about that topic that made you willing to do that exchange? Or even if it's ungated, say, why does that topic prescient to you right now? And that leads to some follow-up conversations that are more about the person you're talking to and their issues, their problems, their needs, which is a much more interesting conversation to have. Eventually, we can put that in context of NetLine or Qualified or whoever you're selling for. But you got to sort of meet the prospect in the moment where they are. Sometimes 3 steps is faster than 1 to get to where you want. So speed to lead, yes, but context and relevancy of that engagement and response is also really important.
And I would add to that, Matt, it's all about like intent driven engagement. So not just like responding to everybody with the same exact message. And personalization is no longer just like, hi, first name, last name, we saw you downloaded, report. It's also like, how can you gather all of your intent signals or your interest signals happening, third party, first party, whatever it may be, and use that to shape your outreach and interactions versus just like a one size fits all follow up, because that won't cut it anymore and buyers will call BS on that.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. And they're not afraid to either.
No.
This is great. So I think that's a really great covering of like the frustrations and the killers of pipeline. So what I want to get into next is talking about like the heart of all of this, which is that sales and marketing relationship. Like this is a conversation that has been like decades long. The through line is, it's encircled the globe like multiple times. But it's still really important, especially today where, yeah, like we mentioned, speed to lead, context, buyer behaviors and intent, like all of those are so important. And without the right relationship or handshake or hand holding between sales and marketing, like none of that matters, right? So alignment, let's talk about it. Most of the time, I think it can feel like a very long distance relationship. So how can we like shorten that and make that feel more connected? Maura, I would love to have you kind of talk a little bit about, from your experience being CMO at Qualified, like what's your tips for marketers out there?
Yeah, I mean, it's been interesting. I've been at Qualified for almost 6 years, so kind of since the beginning. So I was part of us trying to stand up our framework and have a strong relationship since the beginning. But as the company's grown and as our targets have grown, we've had like, some highs and lows of sales and marketing. But I think what the most important thing, and this sounds so basic, is like start with the basics. What is your definition of pipeline? And if you went and asked your CMO and your CRO, would they say the same thing? What's your definition of S1 pipeline, of S2 pipeline? How do you define all of the stages in the sales cycle? And write that down and put pen to paper and make sure that the entire go-to-market organization understands the definitions. I think that is like P1, and sometimes that's kind of overlooked. And then you'll wake up and look up and realize like, oh, we're talking about something slightly different. And then I think the second one that's really, really paramount, especially in today's world, is like shared pipeline metrics and targets. I think when you live in a siloed world where marketers are working towards MQLs and SQL numbers and sellers are just focused on ACV, when you don't have that shared pipe gen target across the entire organization, it all starts to crumble, and that's where I think some of the finger pointing begins.
Mm-hmm.
At Qualified, we still have metrics that like the marketing team's accountable for. So we looked at marketing source pipeline and things that are coming through like paid and events, et cetera. But we also have a larger pipe gen target. And at the end of the day, I don't care as much who gets the credit for pipe gen. I just care that our organization is hitting our overall pipe gen target quarter over quarter over quarter. So I think that's what's most important. Definitions, shared targets, and you start to work as one team. Something that is interesting that we do, and I think a lot of companies do this, but we do a weekly pipeline council. And every week we come together and we talk about how we're tracking against our targets. It's the sales team, it's the marketing team. We highlight great plays that happened of like, hey, I did this play and I outbounded to somebody who was showing intent and I followed up with them. And it like, we celebrate the successes. And we also talk about our gap plans and how we're going to close them out. And that weekly gathering, it's on Zoom. We're a remote first company. It helps that alignment and that FaceTime. And it sounds kind of foundational and not overly sophisticated, but it's really, really important to helping us just stay aligned.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think, yeah, having the conversation, right? Like that's the best way. That's the fastest way to get to know someone. And I think, yeah, it reduces the ego, the finger pointing. You can actually like have the conversation, and only if you set the ground rules, right? Of like, we're here to collaborate, we're here to be honest, we're here to be transparent. Like, we're not here to claim credit. Because I think that like Maura, you mentioned something that you don't really care who gets the credit or who's like responsible, as long as we're all like working towards that same goal. Like, we're all winning from that, right?
Well, it's such an interesting time because like no buyer comes in just through one
Straight
line.
line.
So like I have a hard time sometimes with the credit claiming because I'm like, okay, yeah, it's tagged as outbound, but really they saw an ad and they came to the site, and I followed up with them and then they converted. So I'm like, it all works together. So it's important to have metrics so you're working towards keeping marketing accountable. But at the end of the day, I'm like, I care about quality pipe gen. That's what I care about. If it's sourced outbound or inbound or whatever, like because it all works together in today's day and age, and that's how it should be working together. But I think sometimes you have to shake some old school thinking off of some folks to get them to kind of see it that way.
Yeah. Matt, what about
I'm
you?
laughing because of what Heather said here is like every conversation I feel like we have in this kind of a setting, eventually you get to either AI and or attribution. It only took us 18 minutes to get to attribution. So I don't know how to say, but yeah, Maura is absolutely correct, right? Like unless you're selling something super transactional, which is more of a consumer play than a B2B play, as soon as you start talking about credit, you're having the wrong conversation. And the only thing I'll say about attribution before I move on to your original question, Josh, is that like attribution when done well is about the future, not the past. I don't really care what happened in the past. It's already done. I spent the time and money on it. The only reason I cared about it is because I want to create a predictable, repeatable outcome again. What of the things that happened should I be doing more of, in what order, to get the same outcome that I care about? And it is going to be a body of work. It is going to be a group effort, right? We win and lose as a team. And that's not always what a CFO wants to hear, because they want to hear like which channels worked and which channels didn't. Which channels should we spend more on? And I can give you that answer, but it's going to be based on a body of work, not based on individual tactics doing all of the work.
Yeah.
Done.
Only we're that easy, right?
Well, I can sit in my ivory tower and talk about this all day long. It's way more complicated, right? And like the attribution tools keep getting better, but they are continuing to be outpaced by the complexity of how the go-to-market motions actually happen. From a pipeline standpoint, the thing I would mention is the difference between your total addressable market and your serviceable obtainable market. Right. And then there's all the stuff outside of that, right? Someone that comes to your last 4 webinars that you may score them highly, they may not be qualified, they might be bored, right? And so just because they did things with you doesn't mean that they're the right people from the right companies. And just because someone is in your addressable market doesn't mean they're someone that meets all of the attributes you have identified and documented internally that say which subset of our market is more likely to have the problems we solve and more likely to be willing to buy it. Because otherwise you get a lot of false positives. You get someone that gets the mark, gets the problem, but doesn't have budget or isn't big enough. You get someone that gets the market and gets the idea, but their organization is not mature in this category enough to reach a consensus to change where they want to buy it all. So how have you documented, not just defined, but documented your serviceable, obtainable market? When I ask people all the time, I said, who are your best prospects? And they list them off for me. I said, great, show me where that's written. They're like, no, we just know. Guarantee you that is being executed inconsistently across go-to-market motions. So it sounds parochial, but like write it down and show it to everybody and have the argument up front. Why this, not that? Why this, not that? Go find the data. You have access to tons of data inside and outside your company today that can tell you who your best customers are. Define that serviceable, obtainable market and weight your pipeline as heavily as possible on that group. The execution, the playbooks are all critically important, but if you start from that baseline, you're far more likely to have a predictable outcome from your pipeline.
I mean, we talked about it a little bit, Matt, but so much of pipe gen and having a predictable model, it's internal communications. It's making sure that everybody's singing from the same song sheet. Everybody has the same definitions. They understand the processes to follow, especially if your company is growing fast. You're bringing on new sellers every day. You're bringing, or, not every day, but every month. Like, how do you make sure that everybody understands what that motion looks like, or else chaos will ensue?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that for me, like, this is where something like a service level agreement or like an SLA around like who your addressable market, or Matt, like what you had mentioned, like who are they? Not only like from the persona perspective, but like let's go deeper into understanding like what typical behaviors do they exhibit, right? Like what types of engagement are they demonstrating? What types of topics interest them? Like, I think that the more data that you can gather around your buyers when it comes to how you engage them, like the better off you'll be, and the better informed that your sellers and marketers can be too when it comes to actually coming time to whether creating that content or reaching them out for a follow-up. But
And
you
you
need
can
that foundation
you can
before that.
impact and predict future pipeline by doing exactly, Josh, what you just said, right? So there's things you will do with your serviceable obtainable market that are not going to immediately create pipeline and may not even immediately create leads, right? But are putting the right content in front of the right people so they get to know you, right? Maura's right, and the first person to get back to a lead is more likely to get the deal. Recent research shows the first person that people know of is more likely to have the advantage as well in that opportunity. Now, your buyers don't want to hear from you until late in the process, but they still will more likely buy from the first person they know about. So they don't want to hear from you, but how do you do that? Content, like the right content, not selling content, not pitchy content, and not content that you're even worried about, like getting them to raise their hand and capture their information, right? Get the good content in front of people, build a reputation. Like there's a metric we track even internally that says people in our serviceable obtainable market, how many people on a week-to-week basis in those companies that are the buyers, the potential buyers, are engaged with our content, clicking on a newsletter, going to our website, checking out our blog, downloading the podcast. We track that on a week-to-week basis. And that shows me the health of my pipeline 2 to 4 quarters out. Because those are the people that if they're engaged, they eventually will eventually at some point, if I got my serviceable obtainable market definition right, they will have a need. And so it helps me ensure long-term pipeline performance.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes, Matt, it's hard to convince non-marketers like your CFO, et cetera, why you're investing in some of those programs, thought leadership programs, virtual events, ebooks, whatever it may be. But I think you're exactly right. Then when the buying conversation starts to happen, you're part of it, or else you're going to be totally excluded. So it's paramount.
It's really hard. I mean, the math you're literally talking about is I'm spending budget this year to impact pipeline next year. Like if you've got 6 to 12 month buying cycles, you have to make that multi-year investment. And yet we tend to sort of do budgets, year by year, if not quarter by quarter, or whatever. But like we're looking for that short-term return and not indexing enough those longer-term investments. And if you don't do the long-term investments, you're going to continue to have either a roller coaster of pipeline or worse, just sort of these like constant fire drills that make you pay a premium for getting the pipeline that you need right now.
Yeah, that's great, actually. Yeah, that's a really good point. Like buying cycles are getting like they're only getting longer, it feels like, and more people are getting involved. I think I saw something from like Forrester that says like there's like 13 on average like people in a typical buying decision these days, and most buying decisions, like 90% of them, consist of like at least 2 departments now. Like there's so many things to take into consideration with that, and if you're not investing now in ensuring that those buying groups and those individuals are getting the content and the resources that they need to like know who you are, like you're already going to be behind the game by the time like they're ready to buy, right?
Yep.
So this is great. Pablo actually mentioned something that segues really nicely into our next section here, which is around data. So, when we think about precision, I don't think that the problem with data isn't necessarily access anymore. I think it's clarity, right? Like we have so much data that we now are having to sift through. And AI does help with that to some degree, but I think making sure that it's clear and readable and understandable and actionable is still like that's what's separating like the leaders from the laggards. So let's try and cut through that data fog in this next section. So Matt and Maura, when it comes to intent data, let's say, what is the difference between something that is actually like a real buying signal versus something that just like looks shiny on paper, but maybe we can save that for another time? Maura, do you want to take this one first?
Yeah, I mean, when I think about intent data, I obviously think about first party data and third party data. I think when it comes to first party data, we spend a lot of time because we really focus on the website, looking at website behavior. And it's not just high quality pages that folks are visiting, but it's frequency and urgency. And like, how are we seeing those things tick up? But if they're just spending time on your website, that's not enough data. You have to obviously pair it with a third party data. What else are they looking at on the web? I think those two data sources are very different. Like we talked about being part of the conversation earlier. If their third party data is, if that's spiking, but they are not showing any first party intent, then you're not going to be part of the conversation. They don't know who you are. You have to layer those two things together. We actually at Qualified, we have something that we call our cup of coffee dashboard. It's in Salesforce every morning, and it pulls together all of our intent data from a bunch of different systems, and it serves it up to our SDR team every morning. So while they're drinking their cup of coffee, they can see which accounts in their patch are surging, and it's based on a medley of first party and third party intent data. And they can then kind of use their best judgment to understand who should I be going after. So that's kind of how I see the world is both are important, but you need to look at them in one clear picture, not as kind of separate data streams. And I think if you can find a way to pull it together as a single source of truth, that's great. Or else you just have a ton of different values and a ton of different systems, and it's not actionable to anybody.
Yeah. Matt, what about you?
Well, first of all, I think you just gave it to Maria, who's our COO. I'm like, I want a cup of coffee pipeline report. That sounds great.
She would love that, wouldn't she?
Love to see that, especially if it comes with an actual latte. I mean, if you're going to talk about a
direct
upgrade,
mail campaign for someone out there.
Yeah. I find it interesting, both Josh and Maura, like we're marketers, and yet we are terrible at naming things. Let's go back in history to see how bad we are at this, right? Like marketing automation, not automated, right? Like we implied to people that it's a set and forget, and it's not, right? Social selling, not selling, right? You're not selling and closing anything in B2B on social selling. Account-based marketing, if it's just marketing, we failed, right? So we can't call it that. And now we keep doing it because we're calling these signals intent signals. Mm-hmm. And so the assumption amongst a lot of people using it is this is someone that's intending to buy. Mm-hmm. And so we're doing the whole like, thanks for doing whatever you did. Would you like to see a demo, right? To me, I mean, there are those signals exist. Like some signals do imply someone really is at a later stage of the buying process. But I would say that that's the minority of the signals that we should be taking advantage of. To me, there are two signals further in the buying process that are more important for us to think about as marketers. One is a need signal. It's evidence that there is a need in the organization, that the buyer understands that need, that they're trying to figure out what to do with it, right? They're not necessarily pursuing a solution, but they know that they have a need. And prior to need signals are evidence signals. This is where it gets really interesting, where there's evidence that there is a need, but the prospect, the buyer, has not yet identified it as a need. They have not prioritized it as a need. So you've seen this movie as a seller, you've seen this buying journey in movie many, many times. The prospect is going through it for the first time. How are you connecting the dots? How do you connect the dots between the signals of evidence and helping to fast forward the prospect understanding there's a need and getting to a commitment to change, and doing that from your content? Doing that on behalf of your thought leadership, doing that behalf of your expertise. Like that is the recipe for being the trusted advisor, being the first person in front of someone, guiding them through the process and that you follow up quickly when they do have an engagement, and now you're off to the races. So like being willing to invest in those earlier evidence and needs signals is critical. So much data available to us these days. It's kind of like a great library with all the books on the floor. You can't just pick up random books. You got to know what data you need. The better you've defined that buying journey, the better you've defined members of the buying committee and what they need, the more likely you know exactly what signals to pick up and leverage.
Yeah. Matt, I'm so glad that you mentioned that because I do remember now like our conversation. So we recorded a webinar last year where we talked all about intent signals and kind of deconstructing them. And yeah, I think that the breaking it down into evidence-based signals, need-based signals, and then finally have like declared intent, like that in itself is a funnel or at least a journey of like progression of where a buyer is. And I think it's up to as marketers to like make sense of that for the buyers and make that like it's our job to be their guides is what you had mentioned in that chat that you and I had. So I love that. Um, related to this, what do you both think is a metric that most marketers are actually overlooking? So they're not paying attention to it at all, but you think, hey, that is like something that, we really should be keeping an eye on. Maura, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, something that I'm kind of obsessed with right now is like going beyond. We talked about quality pipeline and making sure there's a target there. But I think sometimes there's a feeling of, okay, once I hand it over the fence and once that first meeting has happened, my job is done. And I want to make sure that there is more oversight and more of a partnership between marketing and sales on what happens after that first meeting. Because you could generate all the pipeline in the world. And if it's not properly being worked, then who cares? You're never going to hit your targets. So that's something that I'm trying to just kind of triangulate. I would love if there are any suggestions in the chat of like, how do you make sure, and without stepping on sales toes, that like there are proper processes that marketing can help support and influence from how that first call goes to what the follow-up templates look like after that first call to usher deals along. And so I'm trying to figure out like what are the best ways to kind of measure that so that you feel like your hard-earned pipeline and meetings that you're generating after taking folks through that funnel are getting worked properly. And I know that kind of goes back to the sales and marketing alignment piece. And really, I think obsessing over that speed to lead tactic that we talked about at the beginning. Are we looking at that time and obsessing over it and making sure that it's as quick as possible, not just for the benefit of the business, but for the benefit of the buyer? Because in today's age, nobody wants to wait. And so how do we have that dashboard in front of us that promises you that you're getting to your leads quickly? So those are the two things that are really top of mind for me right now.
Yeah. I love that. Matt, what about you? What are you obsessed with, or what's something that you think is getting overlooked?
Yeah, I mean, there's a metric that isn't like, so I think it was Andy Crestodina once said like, the easier the metric is to capture, the less important it is. And so there's a metric that's harder sometimes for people to sort of define and capture. It's pipeline velocity. And I think it's a really important thing to watch because it takes into account a lot of different things you're doing across sales and marketing and ensure that think of it as like continued momentum. I mentioned earlier about time kills deals, right? So if someone was really engaged and then you haven't followed up with them in a couple of weeks, they've moved on to other things. And so you got to like rebuild that momentum. Well, how do you keep pipeline velocity? Well, you anchor on a need up front. You anchor on an outcome. You anchor on the cost of inaction, and then you get multiple people through multi-threading to care about that and keep it going. And sometimes it's the whole committee, sometimes it's cohorts, sometimes it's individual conversations. But what are you doing to keep that momentum going? What are you doing to keep that conversation moving forward? Even if it's still going to take months or quarters, managing the pipeline velocity is going to shorten your sales cycle and increase your conversion rate and opportunity close rate. But you got to be able to measure it and know what are the components that go into it. The recipe for pipeline velocity is slightly different for different companies based on your go-to-market motion. But I think it's a unifying tool as well because it requires sales and marketing to think together about how they are impacting that.
Yeah, I love that. This is great. For those of us who are just joining, by the way, this is an AMA that we're saving 15 minutes at the end for all of your questions. So even if they don't relate to what we're talking about right now, feel free to ask those in the chat and we will cover all of those. We already have like 2 questions so far. So yeah, anything top of mind that you guys want to ask, feel free to do so. But we're going to go into our next section here, and that's around scale. So we talked a little bit about targeting, sales and marketing relationships. We just talked about data. But now let's talk about like how, maybe a campaign works too well. And Maura, you had actually touched on this a little bit where it's like you don't care how much pipe gen you have if no one's working it, right? So let's talk a little bit about scale. When leads are sitting untouched, like that's good for nobody. So I want to dig into how the best teams are building systems that don't just like do marketing well, but are able to scale that for growth. So if you had to pick one must-have for building a predictable and scalable pipeline, like what comes top of mind for you? And Maura, maybe you can take this one first.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to pitch, but like this is really
I'm
what we're
setting you up. I'm so sorry.
no, but it like personalization at scale has always been the pipe dream for marketers, right? And that's what we always want to achieve, but it's been really hard. I think even we have it in the chat of like the promise of marketing automation, it's not set and forget it. And I know you said at the beginning, Matt, how many minutes till we talk about AI and attribution, but I think
Heather's keeping track.
okay, good job. That's an AI count. But I think like as we think about scale, I'm really excited about AI agents. We have our AI SDR agent. It's Piper, who I talked about, but it's all focused on how can you make sure that you're servicing every lead autonomously and at scale, and not just the leads that are like those really, really big hand raisers, but also nurturing leads with relevant content and moving them down the funnel. So I think just AI right now is obviously a huge unlock for how can you kind of ditch the old way, which is only folks who show certain interest or intent or whatever we want to call it, signals, but also like use AI agents to go after all leads with the appropriate message. So I think it's an exciting time because we're kind of rewriting the playbooks of like nurture emails and what AI agents are doing and what marketers are doing. And I feel like it's putting marketers back into control to really service as many leads as possible. So I know that's a bit of you gave me a little bit of a, what's the basketball term?
Layup,
A layup.
softball.
Yeah, but that's like, that's what we're excited about. It's like, how do you tap into this to nurture all of your leads and like make sure that you're not having those leads get cold?
Mhm. Yeah. What about for you, Matt? Any kind of system, framework, methodology that you just think is a must-have?
Yeah, I'm gonna go non-sexy but vital. In my word is orchestration, right?
Oh, that's a
Because we
pretty.
talk a lot about the complexity of the motions we're executing and the way we need that to sort of weave together seamlessly in the eyes of the buyer and the buying committee. It is getting increasingly difficult for internal teams to actually execute that. When you've got multiple teams, multiple people, multiple departments all involved in making that happen, like Gartner calls what happens in most organizations collaboration drag, right? We're trying to get things done. There's too many meetings. No one knows who's doing what. There aren't really defined workflows of what's happening by department, by individual, robots versus humans. So I do think, yeah, well, Sarah's right. Like, I mean, internally, we think it's really sexy, but like really nailing that go-to-market orchestration and thinking through the RACI framework of like who's responsible for what in the organization, what's the actual workflow, like really detailed workflow diagrams that make it clear what happens when, what happens for different types of leads and engagements and signals, what happens from marketing versus sales, what happens from a robot versus a human. I mean, there's a ton of different variables you have to think through that if you do that work up front, it actually speeds up execution. It frees teams up to be more creative and more agile. So thinking through those workflows and taxonomies and all the things that sort of go into making that work, as you grow your team, as you grow your expectations, as you grow the complexity of your go-to-market motions, you have to couple that with a strong focus on go-to-market orchestration to make it all continue to work.
Yeah, this is great. So we have like 5 or 6 minutes left for this before we get into some questions, and I've seen a lot come in, so thank you all for making this next section going to be fun. Before we get to those, though, I want to close with some hot takes and some future forecasts for you both. So we've obviously covered a lot today. And the reality is that what works today might not work a year from now, right? I think that we can all be honest about that. There's so many shifts, buyer behaviors are changing, tech is evolving so quickly. So how do we stay ahead? So let's start with this question. If you could give just one tip to someone who is looking to build a rock solid revenue driving, predictable pipeline, what would that tip be? Like, what would you write on a post-it note and like stick to their monitor to look at every day? Maura, do you want to go first?
Well, when I was thinking about this, I wrote down hire a great rev ops leader or marketing ops superstar, because that is the key to success, which is having somebody who really understands every area of the business. And then I think Matt kind of touched on this, but it's look at your pipe gen playbook in motion and simplify as much as you can. If you have old tech that's not bringing you valuable information, if you have too many cooks in the kitchen, if you have too many like steps in your follow-up process, see how you can cut some of that stuff in half. Because I think we have gone on this tech buying spree over the last couple years, and we have more data than we've ever had before. But is it slowing you down? So awesome RevOps marketing ops leader, and also like put pen to paper, write it all down, and see where you can prune, because more data is not better data.
I love it. Matt, what about you? What's your tip?
If you don't have the fundamentals locked down, it's going to be a mess, right? I increasingly think of this as bedrocks, like your serviceable, obtainable market, the people you need to be talking to in that organization, the journey they go through. I mean, think about it as 4 fundamental questions. Who are the companies we really should be talking to? Who are the people in those companies that really matter and help make decisions? What do we need to be saying to those people to get them to pay attention and to get them to move forward? And then how and where do we share that information? Like your fundamental answer to those 4 questions now gives you the basis of a playbook to go and execute. And the answers to those questions may evolve over time, but having those things defined is the bedrock of your go-to-market strategy, not just your marketing efforts, but how you go to market overall. Invest the time in getting that done. Invest the time in getting it documented and agreed upon and followed by all. We talk even internally about like you have a process, you have something documented, fine. Having it documented is the first step, followed by all is the second step. And if you don't do that, then what are we doing here, right? So bedrock foundations for go-to-market, followed by all. That will make everything work more seamless, even if you just put that in place.
I love this. All right. Well, we are wrapped up on our end on this side, so let's open it up to some attendee questions. We've got a couple here in my pretty little doc, so I'm just going to read through this. So first question to you both is, what factors do you think are contributing to sales and marketing gaps? And what can we do as marketers to minimize the gaps or enhance the experience during those gaps? Like, for example, how can we make content and information more convenient? So, Matt, Maura, I'll let one of you two start with that one.
Yeah, I mean, for us, I think something that's been really great is there's someone on my team, and they are the linchpin, they're the liaison between our marketing team and our SDR team. That was a lot of that's often a frustration, which is we're creating all this content, no one's using it, and how do we bridge that divide? So we have someone on my team who like his responsibility is to go to the SDR team meeting every week. It's to funnel them content and then create that feedback loop to make sure because marketing, we can be in our ivory tower and we can be spewing out our messaging and creating our content that we think is the best. But then the sellers are in the field and they know what's resonating and they know where buyers are calling BS. And so if you can have that person whose job it is and they have KPIs that show success, that sales and marketing are more aligned, I think that's critical. So that's been really fruitful for us and something we've invested more in over the last couple quarters, and it's been really helpful because the bigger you get, the more the two start to stray away from each other.
Yeah. Matt, what about for you? Any thoughts?
Well, I want to address Andy's question first. Like, Josh is definitely a plant dad. For some of you know, Josh used to work at Heinz Marketing before he sort of went off and launched, and sort of his star continues to grow. But even when we had an in-person office, there were plants everywhere in his office. It was actually wonderful. It brought a lot of night life and color to the company.
I want to see what the rest of your house looks like, Josh. I'm like, if this
it's just more plants. It's like a greenhouse.
It's now that though, and dog hair, because we got a new puppy, so it's like a lot of just like dirt and dog hair. So it's you don't want to be
a fun place, to be honest.
I'd love to come over.
Yeah. I think of 2 things when you think about that sort of like that combined go-to-market teams. One is baggage. I think we bring a lot of history to our relationships based on past companies we worked at, where maybe marketing was the arts and crafts department at your last company, and maybe that's not the intention here. Maybe sales really was a bunch of like old school cowboys that never logged into CRM. But like our assumptions about how the other team works is going to continue to persist unless we just get it on the table. I can't tell you how many times I've done workshops with go-to-market teams where we will start just by saying, let it out. Like, just what do you hate about them? What do you hate about them? And it may not be this team. It may just be your perception, real or perceived, from the past. Let's get it out. And then we can move forward as a unified team with the same objective and a similar purpose. So that is one. Two is accountability. Because I've also seen a lot of marketing leaders go to sales kickoff and talk about with jazz hands, like, hey, we're going to be revenue responsible. We're going to do all these things. And it doesn't translate to Tuesday. It doesn't translate into what's happening on a day-to-day basis that actually supports that effort. I mean, the sheen of SKO wears off very quickly when you don't have those bedrocks in place, when marketing doesn't follow up on what they said they were going to do or what they should be doing, right? So I think that sort of like addressing the baggage and having a fresh start, but then being accountable to each other for the roles you need to play and the jobs that need to be done to build that pipeline is critical.
Yeah, and Matt, one thing that's interesting that someone said to me once is like, you can't go to your board meeting and have closed business be yellow or red, but have pipeline be green. Like,
right.
You're going to look like a fool. So you need to come together and have these shared targets across closed business and across pipeline and be telling the same story also to the CEO, to the board, who, you know, if you're a bigger company, if you're public, whoever it may be, but it's
Absolutely.
like, you're going to look silly. So how do you make sure you're aligned on those targets and telling the same narrative?
100%.
This is great. Next question here. Does nurturing have an expiration date?
Let Matt take one.
Yeah. Matt, go ahead.
No. I mean, unless I'm not like in your serviceable, obtainable market, like if I'm not someone you should be selling to, you shouldn't be talking to me anyway, to be honest, right? And there's people that I will spend time on that are prospects where I'm like, they're not in my serviceable, obtainable market, but they have a question, they have a need. They may get bigger. That marketing leader may go somewhere else. Like you're constantly making investments in what I nerdily call value deposits with people and companies and organizations. But like the always on I mean, you never know, right? And it's so easy. Like the email newsletter is such an easy thing to do. And if as long as it's good content, right? I mean, let's face it, most of the sales and marketing we're doing is like driving by someone's house like 35 miles an hour and trying to throw something in the mailbox. Like you're going to miss a lot and they're not always going to capture everything. And like, I don't know, you guys, like there's a long driveway between my mailbox and my house. And so I sort the mail on the walk back, and most of the mail does not make it in the house. It goes right in the recycle bin. How do you make sure your content makes it in the house? How do you make sure over time people recognize the value of what you're sharing? They may not always read it, but they recognize the car driving by and say that car has good content. I don't mean that in a stalker way, but I mean, like you are always doing that work. And sometimes deals take a month or a quarter. Sometimes deals take 5 years. Back to Maura's comment earlier. We need to drive pipeline right now. We need to drive sales right now. But I am always working on pipeline months, quarters, years in advance if I expect to have a healthy, predictable business long term.
I think you're right, Matt. Like you never know when the need will come, but when it does, how do you make sure you're one of the first brands that they speak about? And I do think that content creation and content that they trust, that's not always self-serving and product centric, it's key, or else they'll shut the door on you because they'll think you're just another salesman.
Yeah. You have that no solicitation sign plastered right up front.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, like to me that I think about a quote from a band that I listen to where they say like, you know, for us, like we play these songs live like hundreds and thousands of times, but for someone in the audience, it might be the first time. Right. Mm-hmm. And so you're starting that journey. And so it doesn't matter how often you think you are marketing to someone, like what matters is their perception of you and how long they've been with you and how they're engaging. So,
well, there's a concept I used to call the EFN, the email effing newsletter. It's like just create something simple that is valuable, that is just persistent. And with a lot of our clients, like you just call it's the always on nurture, right? And it's not like, oh, you get 6 emails and then you're done. Like I get pitched all the time, and then eventually someone will send me like, should I close your file, or I guess we're breaking up. It's like, why? If you think I'm someone that's going to buy, I'm not only going to buy within the window of your 6-touch email. So like, don't break up with me. Don't stop. Just keep going with something of value. It kind of drives me nuts when people sort of have their sales cycle. I don't follow it, and then they lose the future opportunity.
You're like,
They
oh,
stop
get him out of
engaging.
here.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Alan, I think that, people, you mentioned that says that sounds like people should never leave the pipeline, but they should be put in different marketing and sales stages. Yes, absolutely. I think that prioritization, especially today,
Yeah.
like where buyers are like consuming more content than ever before, like you need that prioritization and that like segmentation of who your salespeople and who your marketing people are going to be engaging with versus who is not ready yet, obviously, but could be ready in the future.
Yeah,
That's
I mean, even if you're managing the pipeline well, I mean, there's a reason we call this a pipeline and not a cylinder, right? Like you're still not going to close everything, even those that are truly qualified that have a need. Things happen. That's why you have to have multiples in your pipeline, but you also don't want to have them in the pipeline forever. We have two stages in a Salesforce. We have a close lost and a close nurture, and I rarely use close lost because if someone decides not to move forward on something, it's usually because they just prioritize something else.
Yeah, it's
Even
not
if
never.
someone
closed
Not,
nurture is
I'm
fascinating.
saying it's not never, it's just not now.
No, and so I don't want it in the pipeline. I don't want to be looking at it on and think like something's going to happen. But it's not someone that I forget about. It's not someone I just throw out and say, okay, I'll never talk to them again. There is an active engagement cycle for all of those closed nurture opportunities. And some of our best, it's one of our most efficient sources of new pipeline by engaging those folks where we've already invested a lot of time and effort in building credibility. So I think it's a mistake if you sort of treat the funnel as one dimensional. I don't even like the bow tie approach, to be honest, because it all still seems one directional. Think about it as an infinite loop, right? Like people are going to come and go at different stages of the pipeline, at different stages of their career, at different stages in the evolution of the account. And this implies a more complex workflow. But you have to also, I mean, sort of implied in a lot of what we're talking about here is embracing the complexity of how go-to-market works today and putting that into a repeatable, scalable system to be able to execute it well and get the predictable results that you need.
Yeah. All right. We probably have time for one or two more questions. So here is one. B2B buyers are trending to expect more of a self-service experience. I would actually argue that like they're there now. How might marketing adapt to support more of those frictionless buyer-led journeys? Maura, do you want to take this first?
Yeah, I mean, I think this goes back to speed to lead that we're talking about. I think going back to the AI agent topic, because I know that's something that Andy asked about as well. I think that's a great way to kind of unlock a frictionless buying experience. I look at AI agents and like AI SDR agents through two funnels. There's the marketing funnel and folks that are coming inbound. How can you book a meeting with them as quickly as possible on your website when they are ready to buy? And then there's kind of the sales funnel and the prospecting funnel, and how that's kind of, I think, a little bit less relevant for this question. So I think it's how can you audit your website and your tech and use AI to get to those folks quickly? I know Matt's using this on their website from a smaller scale, but it's like the old way of telling people, hold on, I'll get back to you, or sending people like through this delayed funnel. It's no longer going to cut it. So how can you make that frictionless and instant when they are ready to buy? And there's a lot of technology right now that's making that possible.
Yeah. Love it. Matt, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, just following that theme, ungate stuff, man. I mean, like if you've got a prospect that is motivated and interested in your content based on something they're going through, like why would you put a barrier in front of them? Oh, wait, I know. It's because we want to know who they are. It's because we don't want to know how to talk to them again. We want to know how to follow up. We need to have something that either our marketing system or our TDR systems can follow up with. That's our problem, not theirs. That's what we need and want out of the selling process, not what the buyer needs to facilitate greater buying. It's why Piper is so important. It's why ungating is so important. It's why the signals and the data is so important. So you can engage prospects on their terms based on what they're looking for and still manage and create velocity in the process. It is a different playbook than what we had when we put gates in front of everything and send everyone to a 24-year-old to do the blitz follow-up calls.
Yeah.
It's about buyer enablement, if you think about the process that way, but having control over that conversation, having greater precision around the message that they're having, that is the key to the better playbook moving forward.
Love it. All right. We have like 5 minutes. I'm going to ask one more question. Let's do like a 30-second. I'll challenge you both. 30 to 60 seconds to answer this. I am both marketing and sales. Uh, how do I combine both halves of my brain together in the most effective way? Give you some time to think about that.
I mean, so here's what's interesting, right? Is I know a lot of I know more and more CMOs that are taking on the CRO role, and it's really fascinating, like really great CMOs that now have that short-term accountability for what needs to close. It's fascinating to hear and watch them create that balance, right? And they're actually creating a really healthy balance between saying and having credibility around going and saying, like, I have to close deals now, I have to create pipeline now, but I'm going to subsidize the cost and pain of future pipeline if I continue and invest in the long tail of the pipeline and long tail of the buying journey as well. So it's hard, Alan, because now all of a sudden, like, you own that long-term brand and sort of pipeline and awareness building, but you also have accountability for what's closing right now. And so I think having that responsibility together, whether it's just you in the organization or whether you are a CRO that truly understands what sales and marketing need, there is friction there. Your job is to figure out how to create that balance, but also communicate the healthy balance your business needs to hit the number now, but be successful long term.
Love it.
I think as we look at the sales and marketing relationship, I think it's understanding where the expertise lies, but the two need to have like a curiosity about each other's org. The CMO needs to be curious and enlightened on what the sales cycle looks like. And the CRO also needs to be enlightened and curious about like how the marketing operation works. And I think if you can bring those two together, great marketing doesn't matter if business doesn't close at the end of the day, and business won't close at the end of the day if nobody knows that your brand exists. So it's like, I think we're at this interesting point, and Matt talked about more CMOs becoming CROs, of like, CMOs carry more and more weight and responsibility for the closed business, and we're starting to see those come closer together. So I think it's exciting.
I love this. Well, this is great. This has been a very great webinar. So thank you, Matt and Maura, for joining. Love this. One last little thing. I want to know where people can find you if they want to learn more. So, Matt, where can people learn more about Heinz Marketing?
HeinzMarketing.com. Heinz like the ketchup, HEINZ marketing.com. It's so great to see so many friends and people I know, like, you know, Heather, Greg, others in the chat. I'm Matt, MATT at HeinzMarketing.com. Shoot me a note on anything. I'm an open book, and it's super exciting to be here. Thanks, Josh.
I love it. And Maura, where can people learn more about Qualified?
Yep, qualified.com. You can go, you can talk to Piper, our AISDR. I'm also more at qualified.com, MAURA. And thanks for having me, Josh. Good talking with you, Matt. It was super fun.
I love this. And to learn more about NetLine, you can visit us at netline.com. You can email me at jbaez, that's Baez, at netline.com if you want to chat more. But yeah, Matt, Maura, thank you so much again to all of the people who attended. We really appreciate you being here.
Before people leave, I think, do we have a survey that Brendan wants us to put up?
Do we have a survey?
Brendan, do we have a survey? Never mind.
Oh,
Like I'm asking the producer. No, never mind. All right, good. We're good.
Nope, no survey. Great.
All right.
So we will let you all enjoy the rest of your day, the rest of your week, and we will hope to see you in the next one. So thank you so much, everyone. Appreciate it.
thanks, everyone.
Guys.
Bye.
Bye.